Okay,
Sweet.
cool. Well, hello. It's so when I saw this meetup formed, I thought, this is exactly the one I was looking for. So I'm quite excited that we're having the actual first get together. And it's really great to be here to share this experience that I had. So when I was preparing for the session, I was thinking, like, what would be the best structure to present it to, and kind of tried to pull out Vim and map out different journeys through, and it just wasn't getting anywhere. And then eventually I settled on something called the hero's journey. Now, for those of you that don't know what the hero's journey is, it's really a way of structuring a storyline. And the formula goes as follows. So the journey starts in the known world with a call to adventure for the hero. It's followed by an acceptance of that call, a journey into the unknown world. Then there is defeat and death. After that, there's some form of rebirth. Then a journey home, and then a new normal is established. So that's the hero's journey. And what's interesting about the hero's journey is you will see this plot in pretty much every Pixar movie you watch. So, for instance, take Up, for example. In Up, the hero is Carl. He's just an everyday hermit. He's widowed. His beloved Ellie has passed on, leaving him alone in his house. And his call to adventure is when the construction company wants him to move because they're developing that area. And through a series of events, he moves from a known world to an unknown world. In this case, it's Paradise Valley. And he gets there by his house being lifted up by thousands and thousands of balloons. At Paradise Falls, he faces a rising action, defeat and death of old ideas. So in going through, he learns certain powers in this journey, and these powers include the power of friendship with a young boy called Kevin. He also gets the power of letting go of the past. So in fact, in the movie, his house, to raise it up, he has to throw out his wife's old belongings, and that's a really powerful metaphor for him trying to let go of the past. And then it actually ends with his rebirth or return. He returns back from Paradise Valley back to the real world. However, his life is forever changed. So he's enlightened by these powers that he developed along the hero's journey. And he's got the power of better friends, and he turns out that he realizes that his life, when he thought it was boring, was actually an adventure all along. He just didn't realize it. So that was the new normal that he established. So that's the hero's journey plot, and you'll see it every time you watch a Pixar movie. So I'm sorry if I've ruined Pixar for you going forward. I've got little kids, so every time they put in a Pixar, I'm like, okay, Shrek, going into the old world, death, rebirth. It just keeps repeating itself. So I'm going to share my journey around mentorship using the hero's journey plot. And to start my journey, I have to explain to you what my known world is. Now my background, like a lot of you, is I come from a development background. I've got a Vim sticker on the front of my laptop. If that doesn't make me still wanting to be in that world, you don't know what else does. But I really want to take you back to my known world in June 2016. So in June 2016, I joined MYB as a development lead. And really, when I joined MYB, my known world was how to make software. So the team I joined, we had 8 people. We had 4 devs, 2 QAs, a BA, and myself. And there were some specific things that I thought we were going to tackle. So I knew the team had a couple technical challenges. They were facing They had a fragmented code base. There were very infrequent deployments. The code wasn't particularly clean. This was a known world for me. This was a place that I'd been before. I already had the skills equipped to conquer this. And so I figured I would go into this team and we would solve those problems. It would just be an extension of the known world that I was going into. So my call to adventure really started the first time I had a catch up with my dev manager. And he explained to me that part of my role was that I needed to help develop the people in my team. And I thought, well, I've done developing people in teams before, and the best way of doing this is working side by side with them. And that was how I planned on developing the people in this team. I was just going to sit and pair with them, and we would organically figure out how to do these things better. It was explained to me that as a dev lead, I needed to be a little more intentional about developing people. So while the actions were important, there were some other things that I should be doing. And one of them was that they would like me to put together a development plan and help each person in my team go through that development plan. And he suggested to me that a good opportunity would be to review the development plan in my one-on-one catch-ups. The next question he asked was, how frequently was I planning on having catch-ups or one-on-ones with people in my team? To which I responded, well, once a month. That seems like a great cadence. His response wasn't what I was looking for. He felt a better cadence would be once a week. So that was really my acceptance of his call. Was I wasn't mad about having these one-on-one catch-ups every week, but I figured I would give it a go. And my plan in the back of my mind was we would meet weekly a couple times. After 2 or 3 weeks, we would run out of anything to say, and then I could strategically increase the cadence of these meetings to the once a month that I was planning on doing in the first place. But has anybody thought that they could get away with that? There's been a couple. Good, I'm not alone in that. So week 1 passed, and I started my one-on-ones. So this is the journey into the unknown world. And what I discovered was they were taking between 45 minutes and an hour per person. Now, there was a lot of things going on in them. There were discussions around how they should do things. There was a lot of getting alignment, of sharing of mindset. So I was definitely seeing value in the one-on-ones. And I was beginning to think, well, maybe this once a week suggestion wasn't such a bad idea. At about the same time, I discovered the difference between manager schedules and maker schedules. So if you're not familiar with the concept of manager schedules and maker schedules, Paul Graham has a really good blog post about it. And essentially, the premise is that the difference between manager schedules and maker schedules is managers have really small pieces of work to do, and they're continually context switching. In maker schedules, you need large blocks of uninterrupted time. And in Paul Graham's article, he often says how the managers dictate to the makers, and that's not the way it should go, because that just disrupts you building stuff. So I realized I was very much on a manager schedule. I was spending just about 20% of my time now doing these one-on-ones. In addition to the one-on-ones, I had team meetings, I had technical meetings, I had incident meetings, I had bug triage meetings, I had M&L meetings, many, many meetings. I also had this policy in my team that if I was by my desk, I was always approachable. So anybody could interrupt me, because I felt that that was a way that I could serve the team. So I was working on a manager schedule. And being on a manager schedule meant that I wasn't getting as much development as I thought I was going to get, working side by side with the people in my team. I would literally sit down to share a concept with somebody, want to pair with them on something. And just as we were getting into it, somebody would come and need something, or I'd have to pop out to go to a meeting. And it just led to a really, really poor experience all around. So how did this impact the growth of my team members? Well, if you think of the hero's journey, This is where you come to the death part. It was really, really bad. And I needed to change things. So I put some thought into it, and I figured because I wasn't getting the time with the people working side by side with them, well, I was going to start leveraging my one-on-ones to grow them. And the idea that I had was I would set clear goals, set clear outcomes and expectations, then give them a week to achieve that, and I would follow up. I'd basically be like their conscience. Like, how are you going on this? Have you done it? Just getting them going. That sounds like a good idea. Well, in my case, it kind of worked. It wasn't so great. There were a couple things that I found. The first thing was I definitely had very limited time. So I had 45 minutes to an hour at most with each person. And in those one-on-ones, I was not just doing personal development. We needed to tackle other things. So there were conversations. If people were having people problems, we would talk about that. If there was alignment issues. And dare I miss a one-on-one and personal development stopped. Like, it just didn't happen. So the time that I had with people wasn't so great. Also, I was discovering that I was potentially not the best person to have the knowledge that they needed. So for the less experienced developers in my team, I had the skills necessary. I kind of knew the journey that I wanted them to go through because I'd done that. I'd been that. The problem that I had was, even in my one-on-ones, I didn't have enough time to actually get technical with them, even though I knew the journey that I wanted to go through. So I tried various techniques. I tried, you go home and do this problem and I'll do a code review. Turns out I didn't have the capacity to do that. And it just wasn't working. So even though I had the skills, time was still a major issue for my developers. And then the other thing was struggling with empathy. So what I mean by this was I wasn't just having one-on-ones with devs, I was meeting with BAs and QAs. And while I had the theoretical knowledge, I hadn't really walked in their shoes. So I could say to them, as a developer, like, I want the QA to do this, or I want the BA to do this, and this is why. But I couldn't go and say, oh, I know how those darn developers suck, and this is how I've dealt with them in the past, because I was that darn developer. I was the one sucking. So I was struggling on the empathy, and I think that really lost the authenticity that they needed. A lot of the time, they just needed somebody that had been there and done that and could say, oh, I've been there, I know what's going on, this is how I tackled it. So empathy was a little bit of a problem there. The other thing, in addition to that, and this was especially in the early days, was I began to realize that regardless of what I said, people were reluctant to share their weaknesses with me. So even though I wasn't very hierarchical in how I was leading the team, they still saw me as the person that was going to do their performance review. And so that meant they're just not going to tell me, I suck in this, or I'm really struggling. That really took a long time to get to that. They always put me in this light of a manager. And I felt like we were missing some really useful conversations around that. And then there was also the challenge of me being a manager, and there were some things that were hard to share openly. And I was a little torn about putting the slide in because I thought, I really think that open management is a good way of working, but there's some things, sometimes I'm having one-on-ones with everybody in the team, there's some context I know, there's bigger picture stuff where I'm worried that maybe it's a little too early to share it with them, it may disrupt them, and so sometimes I felt disingenuous not being able to really give them, this is my opinion and how I think, what I think's going on, because I actually knew what was going on. Maybe it was too early to share it with them. So there were all these challenges I was facing. So in the hero's journey, when you get to the ordeal and the death, it speaks about how a hero is faced with a task of great and dangerous importance, such as a physical fight or complex life-threatening puzzle or deep inner conflict. So I didn't have any physical fights, but I did have a deep inner conflict. And the conflict was I wasn't seeing the growth in the people that I was expecting. I knew that something wasn't working, but I wasn't sure how to fix it. I was becoming frustrated as a leader. I was getting frustrated with them because I wasn't seeing that progress. And I also didn't have the capacity to invest the time that I would have done if I was just a normal developer in the team. I just didn't have the capacity. And also sometimes I didn't have the skills to do it. So I had hit defeat. Like, it was reaching game over. And seeing minimal success. I think out of that team of 8, I was seeing 2 people progressing, and 2 out of 8 is a terrible number. That's a failure. So, in the hero's journey, we talk about the rebirth. And my rebirth was actually a really great experience. So at MYB, we have this thing called the Into Tomorrow competition. And how the Into Tomorrow competition works is they want you to think of things that you wouldn't do in your normal day job, and you can enter these as part of the competition. And if you win, they give you $5,000 and 5 days paid leave to go and have that experience. So I had heard of a company in the States that was growing young software developers through mentorship, and they used to call it their apprenticeship program, and I was really interested in finding out how they did this. So I entered that into the Into Tomorrow competition as an idea, and I got lucky, I won. So I got to go and spend 5 days with this company to see how they were growing these people. And there were a lot of different things I saw there that really opened up my eyes. But one of the things that I saw was how they were being really, really intentional about mentoring. It was eye-opening. They were able to take somebody with relatively no development experience, and in the space of 6 months to a year, they were creating these seasoned professionals. And it was just around the ecosystem that they were creating around it. So, invigorated by this concept of mentorship, I decided to reattempt growing the people in my team, but to do it through mentorship. So to be successful with it, I had to reframe my thinking. Instead of thinking I had the responsibility of growing each person directly, I thought I have the responsibility of connecting this person in my team with somebody else that is going to be absolutely awesome at growing them. And so that's how I looked at it as the person responsible of the development plans. And there were a few things I outlined that I thought would be ideal in that relationship. So the first thing was that I needed to connect them with somebody that they respected. And nobody's going to learn from somebody that they don't think has credibility. So that respect was really, really important. The second thing was whoever they wanted to be mentored by needed to want to mentor them as well. Couldn't be a forced relationship. I also wanted to set up make it what I call a finite relationship. So I talk about review and renew. I'd been in like semi-mentoring relationships where we would meet regularly, and at some point I wasn't actually getting value out of the meeting, but it just carried on indefinitely because we were too scared to admit that we weren't getting value on it. So I figured rather have small cadences where mentorship is set up, and then you reevaluate whether you want to renew that going forward. And then the last thing was I couldn't have one person mentor everybody. We'd already tried that, it wasn't working, so we wanted it to be spread across people. The way I initiated the mentorship in my team was I started leveraging my one-on-ones, but the questions I started asking them was, who did they feel they could learn from in the organization? Who did they really respect? What were the things that they saw somebody did that they thought were awesome that they really wanted to do? And then we'd have a conversation. We'd have a conversation around whether they had ever considered approaching that person as a mentor and asking to mentor them. Interestingly, when I asked, who do you think you can learn from? Nobody in my team said me, which is good. I think that was really good. Like, they were looking for specific skills, and I was totally happy with that. I would then ask them to approach that person to set up a formal mentoring relationship. So to actually get that person to go and say, can you please mentor me? I didn't want to be the person going to that mentor and saying, will you mentor this person, and trying to coordinate. I really wanted it to get to the point where they were good at pulling mentorship instead of it being pushed onto them. And kind of like when they would press me and say, well, what exactly is formal mentorship? I'd say, well, it's having a proper catch up with somebody at a set cadence where the focus is on you and your growth. That was the focus. Now, because mentorship was still really in its infancy in our space, the people they were approaching to mentor them hadn't actually had the experience of being the mentors themselves. And so to make it easier, we put together some guiding principles. The first was, we'd say to the mentors, there are no stupid questions ever. Your mentee should be able to ask you anything. Don't judge them on what they're asking. And then second is, confidentiality is really important. You do not come and tell me what they're telling you. Like, you've got to keep that confidence for them to really open up to you. So those were the guiding principles. The approach that I encourage mentors to take was to recognize and identify their mentees' learning style. And then once they'd identified that, to really take advantage of it. Different people learn different ways. Some people learn through building, other people learn through reading. They needed to really identify how was this person that they were mentoring learning. And then also clearly identify goals and outcomes and meet regularly. So that was kind of the format that I suggested they use. And then we had a couple of do's and don'ts. So some of the do's: set expectations, short feedback loops, share freely, listen, explain. And then one of the more important things was give your experiences and your war stories. Really, really important. We also identified some of the don'ts we didn't want. So try not to assume knowledge. Never break confidence. Don't try and control. You can't force people. Whenever I think of control, I think of my mother forcing me to eat peas. And to this day, I will not eat them just because she forced me to do it when I was a child. So forcing is never a great idea. So with every hero's journey, there's a new, they return back to their world, and that new normal is established. And for me, the new normal was setting up these mentoring relationships and finding out that they worked really, really well. I'd come in the morning and I would see somebody sitting with somebody else having a discussion. I would see somebody else pairing with somebody else on something that they were learning. All of a sudden, people's progress started improving rapidly. I also started to share like this idea of mentorship with the other leaders in my space, to try and encourage them to get mentorship going, to try and get this ecosystem of mentorship going. And I'd like to say, like, the new normal in our space is that mentorship is a key component to how we grow people. Now, in February this year, I actually ended up leaving my team to take on a new role in my organization. I now head up a thing we call the Future Makers Academy, which is the way that we grow totally inexperienced people into software. And mentorship has still continued to be a core pillar of how we do that. So it's beginning to spread. Having been away from my team for 6 months, I had those conversations when you go back and you ask how it's doing. They show you all the breakthroughs that they've had since you've gone. And you're like, oh, I was the person stopping you from realizing those. So I had one of those moments a couple weeks back where I was just catching up and they were telling me all the innovations they're trying. And really, like, I was so proud of them really taking things to the next level. But mentorship is still happening. one insight we gained since we initially set it up was that setting mentorship relationships up within the same team is a bit of a double-edged sword. So the benefit you get is the mentor and the mentee work side by side. So the mentor really has a good idea of some of the weaknesses that the mentee has. But the challenge you have is they have the same line manager. And that can often be a big problem. Some of the anti-patterns can be what I call a moan zone. So when you just had a bad week and the mentee moans to the mentor, and they both get into that. So that's one of the problems when the mentor's in the same team. And then the other thing is what I call undercover management. So when the mentor takes on the managing role because he's got the same line manager as the mentee, and the line manager starts getting the mentor to tell the mentee to do certain things. So that's a bit of an anti-pattern. What I would suggest is it depends on what they're being mentored about. So technical skills, I think, are really, really good to be grown within the same team. I think when the conversations start moving from like your technical ability to how you see the world and how you would respond to certain, like more of the softer side of things, it's better then that the mentor's actually outside of the line management chain of the mentee, because they can really give straight advice as they see it without fear of who they're going to offend or what they're going to break up. So that's a whirlwind journey of my hero's journey into mentoring software developers. With that, I'm happy to take any questions if there are any, or just thank you for listening to me. Yep. I work for MYB. Oh, okay. So they're a company called Eighthlight, and it's a really interesting story around Eighthlight. Has anybody heard of Uncle Bob? So his son was the guy that started Eighthlight, and their core principle was they were going to build that company up on the foundations of software craftsmanship. So they talk about apprentices, journeymen, and crafters, and they built it up from day one. They're now sitting at about 150 people in that organization spread across 3 cities, and their program, everybody goes through this mentorship program that they put together. Really awesome company to look out for. They also have some really great talks around technical concepts. Any other questions? Yes?
Initially, you mentioned that in order to get the mentorship program, you asked them who they would like to be mentored.
Yeah.
Did you notice that gradually they just found their own mentors by themselves? Once they realized that now they had the conversation with the mentor and they needed another one, did they had to have the conversation with their leader, or they?
So some of them are, and some of them are maybe a little more organized. I know a lot of the mentoring relationships right now are pretty much organic. So it's somebody just going and approaching them directly, and I think that that's how pure mentorship really needs to work. I think to get it started, putting a little bit of a push and coordination is important. But they mostly end up being organic. Any other questions? Yes.
So you enter your journey with the goal of becoming a mentor or providing mentorship, and you came out of it being a coach. So when you look at it, at a transition, how do you feel about the difference?
So what's interesting is what I've found is these words mean different things for different people. So coach, mentor, coordinator, whatever. I'm really comfortable not being the source of all wisdom. And I'm really happy to see that people growing from each other. So I felt great about it. Like it was a load lifted off my shoulders to feel like I wasn't the only person other than that person growing responsible for their development. So it felt great. Personally, it felt great. would I call that coaching? For me, coaching is maybe a little bit different, but I can totally see parallels to how that works. Yep. Maybe one more question and then we call it, unless we have none, and then we can end. Cool. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for your time.
I was waiting, right? Was it easy to find mentors around the office? And what I find personally is quite often the key mentors are the busiest people in the office as well. Like they're managing other people, or they're leading places of work and so on. So how was the exercise of finding suitable mentors, and
Yeah.
is that scalable? I mean, you might do that for one person or two people, but then how do you easily discover a lot of mentors for other people? How do you marry them up, compare them?
Yeah, good question. So the initial conversations we had, pretty much everybody nominated the same person that they wanted to be their mentor, and that's not scalable. So it was, okay, well, he's already mentoring 2 people. You can go and speak to him or her and see if they have that capacity, but who else do you respect in the organization? What else can you learn? What we're finding is, as people have gone through that mentoring experience, they're happy to reciprocate. So they're happy then to be mentors, and that provides a great foundation for the next generation. So I think that in the early days, you have that problem, but as you get that kind of like cultural balance of having this mentor, of being mentored, people are more than happy to pay it forward. And most of them do. In fact, if I think of one of the people that was really early in being mentored, she's an absolutely amazing mentor right now with who she's working with, and really dedicates substantial amount of time to do it, not just company time, but her own personal time. So I think that is a pay it forward, and once you've been mentored and somebody's done that for you, you're a lot happier to do it for others. I think sometimes it's more than appropriate to go, I have too much on my plate. I'm actually not going to be able to mentor anybody right now, and I think that that's fine as well. I don't have a problem with that. But yeah, it takes a little bit of seeding. I guess that's the last question now. Great.